Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is one of the most significant cases in American political history. And it's a case in which the entire process of electing presidents is put on trial. And there have been cases in our history of fraudulent elections. There have been people who've gone to jail for fraudulent elections. Fortunately for America, never in a presidential case, but mayors, governors, senators, many people have gone to jail. There have been many fraudulent elections. Some elections have been undone. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when you consider this case and when you hear the evidence, I want you to play a game that law school professors play with their students. It's called the Socratic method. And in the Socratic method, what we do is we ask students hypotheticals. We ask them to consider facts that may or may not exist, because hypotheticals help to explore what the law is. So here's the hypothetical that I want you to consider when you hear the evidence in this case. Imagine that Donald Trump was correct. Imagine that the voting in Georgia was improper. It could be for one of many reasons. Maybe the machines were broken. Maybe the machines were fixed. Maybe enough votes were not counted or discounted. Just imagine if there were 10 or 15,000 or 30,000, some claimed even more, votes for Trump that weren't counted. Imagine that case. Imagine if Trump were right when he said the election in Georgia was stolen from me. Think about that for a second. Trump is right. It's a hypothetical. You don't have to believe it. Just imagine it. Trump is right. The election, the voters of Georgia voted more for Donald Trump than they did for Joe Biden. Think about that. If he was right, if the election in fact was taken from him improperly, he would not be in this court today. In fact, we would be commending him and praising him for bringing a flawed election to the attention of the public. We'd be clapping hands every time he walked into the room. Oh my God, that's Donald Trump. That's the man who persuaded the Georgia authorities that the vote was not proper. And he got them to change the vote. That's a commendable thing. It's certainly not a criminal thing. So we now imagine that Trump was right. Now, many of you may be saying to yourself, but Trump was wrong. We don't believe that. We think the election was fair. No, but I want you to imagine that Trump was right. If you can imagine that, then you have to conclude under that scenario, you would not be guilty of anything. You would be doing the right thing. Alternate electors, sure, you want that. Recounts, sure, of course you want that. So now if you're convinced, if I've persuaded you that there'd be no crime if in fact Trump was right, if in fact the election was flawed, if in fact more Georgians voted for Donald Trump than for Joe Biden, if in fact that was correct, now here's the key point. If that was correct, then you have to ask yourself the question, what if Trump honestly thought it was correct, but he was wrong? What if, in fact, there were more votes for Biden, but Trump honestly, not fraudulently, not corruptly, honestly believed that he had been denied sufficient votes to change the electoral tally in Georgia? If you believe that, or if the government fails to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt of the opposite, you must acquit, because the crimes of RICO and the crimes of conspiracy are crimes of the mind. They require a state of mind, a specific intent. In the conspiracy case, they require an agreement to commit fraudulent or corrupt conduct. In the RICO case, as you'll hear from the judge, it requires also an individual state of mind. Every single participant in the RICO must have intended to violate the law. But if Donald Trump honestly believed that the election had been improperly taken from him, there can be no crime. it would be exactly the same as a matter of law as if the election had in fact been stolen from him. So I know it's hard for you. If you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and in the voir dire, many of you have said you think the election was fair. I think the election was fair myself. I'm not here defending Donald Trump's argument that the election was flawed. That's not relevant to this case. What's relevant to this case is not what I think. What's relevant to this case is not what you think. What's relevant to this case is what Donald Trump thinks. And so the government has the burden of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump, when he said and did the things that he said and did at that time, he knew and believed that the election was fair. And he just lied about it corruptly, with an intent to deliberately deceive the people. But unless the government can prove that, and it's not easy to prove intent, but unless the government can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump knew that the election was fair, you must acquit.